Hello. So good evening. We're going to start the August 28th Planning Commission meeting. Let's see. We're still kind of getting. Can we do the roll call?
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Bennett.
Here.
Commissioner Nemerov.
Here.
Commissioner Strauss.
Here.
Commissioner Berube.
Here.
Commissioner Miranda.
Here.
Chair Olson.
Here. Thank you. Then we also have the approval of the meeting agenda. Were there any edits to the agenda? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I move approval of the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next, we have the approval of the meeting minutes from the August 14th Planning Commission meeting. Were there any edits to that? I think you had one.
I actually did have a change. I did have a change. Let's see here. On page 4, under item 7A, reports and recommendations, 2020 Planning Commission work plan, the first two bullets talk about using form-based code as a tool for implementing some of the newer development standards and small work group to look further into form-based code and gather information. I had left the meeting just feeling like that what we had done is we had discussed form-based code and the desire to get more information about it and look for opportunities to learn about it. But that we also clarified that we weren't adding it to the work plan. I'm concerned by the way these two bullets are drafted that it sounds like it's actually an approved initiative.
And do you have a recommended edit?
Yeah, it's something like form-based code was discussed and it was decided not to add it to the work plan, but to look for opportunities to learn more about it.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any discussion on that? Is there a motion to move with those amendments? Oh, go ahead, Sue.
I had just a question.
Sure.
On page 3, we were trying to, we just discussed how our minutes are trying to shift to become express a little more brevity. But I believe that in the discussion of the outlot, I would like to see some mention under discussion about how there was great concern about, or concern for the stormwater retention properties that the land currently provides, as it is now, serving as an outlot, so that it was obviously a reason in favor of retaining it as an outlot and not approving the variance or I guess the request. So I just felt that there should be more points there sort of documenting the discussion. Right now we only have 2 bullet points there.
Okay, is there any discussion on that?
I would add one thing to that, is if we do add something about that, just to say that, and that was reviewed with the city staff, and they had determined, that was reviewed by city staff before the meeting, they determined that the removal of trees would not affect the stormwater, the changes in the stormwater flows.
Well, I guess that's not the point of documenting it. The discussion point stated that there was concern for that. Obviously, that is a fact. That was part of our packet. And that would be not accurate to what actually happened that night. I mean, we didn't at that time state that, during that discussion, that, well, that the city reviewed it and therefore it's not an issue. I just want to make sure that there is some documentation of that point of why the concerns from the Planning Commission regarding the stormwater issue.
In that case, I would be against adding that to the minutes because I don't think we're going to start a policy of adding every concern raised into our minutes. And
I don't think that I'm trying to raise every concern. I'm just saying I wanted it a little balanced, and I think that that was sort of the key issue about this parcel for keeping it, the character and the stormwater retention that it currently adds. That would be a big change to change that outlot. That was the major point. Commissioner Nemirup.
Does anyone else have any feelings towards that, one way or the other? It's, got to be honest.
I can provide some language. I'm not prepared right now. I'll rewatch the tape. I can provide something and maybe come up with something that Commissioner Nemirup would be agreeable to.
Yeah, I'm thinking that we might have to do that because I need to refresh my memory too before we make some of those changes. So, Carrie, could we just maybe push this off until the next agenda?
Yes.
Let's do that. Push our. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Is that do I have to make a motion? Do we have to make a motion to do that?
Yeah, we might as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a motion to table the approval of the minutes from August 14th until the next Planning Commission meeting?
I move. So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. Motion carries. So what might be helpful, Carrie, is if we, I don't know, never mind. Never mind. I'm going to let that go. Okay. Back to the agenda. So next we have, so it's still showing up the community comment. Is this at the right time? Okay. Okay, so at every Planning Commission meeting, we allow the community 3 minutes to speak on an issue that won't be covered by the agenda at tonight's meeting. So if there's anyone here who would like to bring up a different subject, they're welcome to come to one of the podiums and present that right at this time. No? None? Seeing none, we'll move on from the community comment. One of these days, somebody will have something. And then I won't know what to do. So now we move into our public hearings. We have one public hearing, and it's an appeal of an administrative decision. I'm just going to open this up at 5712 Woodland Lane. And Chris is going to be presenting this. Thanks, Chris.
Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Is it on? No? Can you hear me? Okay.
Why don't you just speak here and I'll figure it out. Speak in here and then I'll get these.
Okay. So this is an appeal of an administrative decision for a new home building permit located at 5712 Woodland Lane. Thank you. Per the zoning ordinance, decisions by staff as they relate to the zoning ordinance may be appealed to the Planning Commission. Thank you. And are processed in similar ways as a variance request. So this is not a variance request. This is an appeal of staff's decision based on a permit application that was submitted. So this is not weighed against the standards of a variance request. It's simply whether staff has made an appropriate or a right decision based upon the zoning ordinance, the specific zoning ordinance that addresses the issue for the permit. So this is not a variance. It's processed very similar to a variance. So this is an appeal to staff's decision on the building permit for a new home that is a 3-story home and not a 2-story home with a basement, as not included as a story. The owner is intending to construct a 2-story home with a full basement and contends that it complies with the zoning. The plan stipulates that the first floor of the home is the basement and that the basement does not count as a story regarding maximum height. Staff interprets the plan as a 3-story home with the basement counting as a story. Staff contends the house plan does not comply with the 2.5-story maximum zoning ordinance allowance. Now, I'm going to cover a little bit of the zoning ordinance language that we use when we review building permit applications. We do have a definition section which include basements. The definition of a basement, which is the floor level of a building which is located partially or completely underground. A story means that portion of a building included between the surface of a floor and the surface of the floor above. And then a basement with more than 50% of the exterior wall area located entirely below the ground elevation adjoining the basement shall be counted as a story. So on the reverse, if there's more than 50% of the exterior wall area that is above grade, then it would be counted as a story. And then that also relates to the height requirements for the R1 district, which this home is located in, that the maximum height for this particular lot shall not exceed 40 feet in height, which it does not. Measured from average existing grade, it's actually 39 feet. So it meets the overall height requirement. The house can be that tall. However, from a definition section, I don't believe that it meets the 2.5-story, whichever is less, portion of the code. So the property is located at the very end of Woodland Lane cul-de-sac, as highlighted. It's currently a vacant lot. It used to have a multi-story home, split-level home, built in 1952. That has since been removed. The property has a lot of challenges. It's very large, however, it is within the flood zone. This shows you the red area is the floodway. So every portion of the lot that is red can't be built upon. There's very little that you can do on this property, given the flood zone in the red is the floodway. You can't alter that. The darker blue is the 100-year floodplain, which there's some limited opportunities there. And then the 500-year flood is sort of in the middle. You can see the old house, that's where it was located. That's also where the new house is going to be located, because that's really the only place that you can locate a house given the floodway and the 100-year floodplain. This is a busy graphic. It's supposed to show you the other limitations of the lot. This is in the dark blue line, represents the floodway and the 100-year flood elevation. So nothing can be built in terms of building area outside of that. The dark line is the setback area, so they're limited in where they can put the house given side and front yard setbacks. And then the light blue area is a sewer easement. There's also a sewer easement that bisects the lot that you cannot build a building on. So they are very limited in what they can do in terms of where they can locate the house. You can see the buildable area of the lot and where the new home is going to be is approximately where the old house is, or was, pardon me. The other issue is that the lowest floor, the basement elevation, has to be 2 feet above the flood elevation, was at about 862, which is the level of the grade right now. So literally the basement floor has to be at the grade as it is right now, and then everything above that. So there can't be any lower excavation for the basement. This is the old house and where it had been located. You can see the sewer line easement and also the floodplain that circles around it. So a little bit of background. The owner had previously submitted a variance application to allow the home with a first floor height exceeding the allowable 1-foot maximum to construct a home plan that's similar to the subject plan. The other plan was that the first floor was actually the main floor and it was higher than the entry level of the old house, so they requested a variance. The variance request stipulated the first floor is established as the floor above the basement. And you probably do remember parts of that because it did go in front of the Planning Commission. The variance was approved by the Planning Commission on October 11th, 2017. That decision, however, was reversed on appeal by the Edina City Council. And that was in December of 2017. So over the last year and a half, the owner has been working on revisions to the home design and established the basement. as the new first floor. The basement is going to be at the same level that it was proposed originally. The new first floor is lower than the old entry elevation of that split level home, so it no longer needs a variance. And they submitted a building permit application in May of 2019. The applicant presents the plan as a 2-story home with the basement as the new first floor. There's a doorway facing the street going out in the basement, so it can be classified. We don't have a specific definition of what a first floor is. So they are establishing their basement as the first floor. And with the basement having more than 50% of the exterior wall located entirely below the proposed ground elevation adjoining the basement. So they are therefore not counting that as a story. Staff disagrees with that. This is the proposed home. So without all of the retaining walls in the front and on the side, the house would be literally with the basement floor sitting on top of the grade as we have it right now. It will be regraded, and they will have retaining walls along the front of the house and along the north side. There will be a front door on the basement level, so that area will be exposed, as will the tuck-under garages that are along the southeast side. The area of contention that staff doesn't agree with the designer on the project is that there are some very shallow planter box type retaining walls, is I believe what they are referring to them as, that will be filled up with soil against the side walls of the basement, which, if counted, would put the house at more than 50% below ground. And so therefore, that lowest level would not be considered a story, and the house would be a 2-story home with the first floor, the basement. So this is a little same graphic with a little more detail on the heights of the different retaining walls in the front and on the side, and then the 2 narrow planter boxes. Now, I mean, if they could, I'm sure they would like to regrade the back of the property. They could certainly add some retaining walls back there. However, the floodway elevation comes right up against the house. So there's no way that they can go any further than they have those areas that are going to be filled with soil on the back of the house. So when looking at the permit, the perimeter length of the basement area is about 119 feet, with roughly 59% of the exterior wall area of the basement exposed and above grade, with approximately 80 feet or roughly 40% of the wall area below grade. Now that is if you look at it without those 2 areas behind the home that are the narrow planter type grade boxes. Staff concluded the basement has more than 50% of the exterior wall area above ground and therefore must be counted as a story, and did not approve the building permit. So here is the elevations of the home. Again, you can see the front elevation with the regrading and the retaining walls. Along that south side, you have the exposed garage doors. It's tucked under garage. This gives you a little bit better visual of how that looks from the street. The north portion is completely below grade. They have retaining walls along that north side. And then along the back side, you have these narrow areas that have soil in them against the foundation wall. So this is the basement or first floor of the house. What you'll see is on the back of the foundation wall are these shallow, narrow planter box retaining wall type areas that are in question. And then this is the floor above, and then the floor above that, which include the bedrooms. So In terms of discussion items, the applicant has established the basement as the new first floor. The applicant established the planter box retaining walls in the plans as the proposed ground elevation adjoining the basement, and therefore excludes the basement as a story. The applicant contends the new home is 2 stories above the first floor, which is more than 50% below grade, which is the basement, and the first floor basement does not count as a story when considering height. And with that, I will stop and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chris. Go ahead, Jerry.
Thank you, Chris. That was very good. Just simplify for me. They're at 40% coverage for that basement floor.
No, they're not even close to their building coverage. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, to get to that floor in consideration to be called either a basement or a first story.
It would be the square footage of the exterior wall area to be considered.
Okay.
You know, what is below grade?
And I thought, was it a 60-40? I thought
59 is, I mean, that's what I estimated it to be.
Okay.
However, they are saying that including, which is true, including those areas that they've counted on the back, they would be more than 50% below grade.
But you're disputing the fact what they're saying is.
That's why the permit
effective
was
as-
rejected.
Yeah, okay.
Correct. It doesn't have anything to do with the criteria for variances or the height of the building, or it's simply whether that is counted as ground elevation along the back of the house.
So the solution appeared to be to get to that 50-plus square footage coverage.
Right. They want to be over.
Then if it's designated a basement floor.
Right. It wouldn't be counted as a story.
Yeah. So it really turns around.
And they're obviously very limited in what they can do, especially in the back, because they're bumping up against the floodway.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Chris. So just so we can understand and appreciate the opportunities on this lot and the difficulties of the lot, how deep does that sewer run?
I don't know, but it's a main sewer line, and it's not anything that
You don't want to mess with it?
no.
Okay.
And you can't build on it. You can put some, obviously the retaining walls can go on there
Yeah.
and a driveway, but no building area.
You can't build on it even if you don't have a basement?
Correct.
Okay.
That was made very clear from the beginning from engineering. They don't want
Okay.
anything on that.
Okay. Thanks.
Sorry, any questions for Chris? Sue?
Hi, Chris. I think that's a very, very clear and thorough presentation. I do recall this project, so it does look substantially the same. We received some correspondence from a resident who did a lot of technical graphics and submitted that. I was just curious if you had a chance to review that. Did you find any discrepancies in what was provided in that documentation? It seemed to match up with what you had.
Yeah, I received what you did. I don't know what scale. I mean, it looks similar. I don't know.
Okay, but
I'd prefer that whoever submitted it would present it.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead.
Okay, going back to the, actually, hold on for a second. So what they're trying to build here, I guess, is a house with 3 levels. And that's fairly common, isn't it?
Well, it's, pardon me, fairly common to have a 3-level home when one of the levels is a basement, but we allow 2.5 stories above a basement.
Yeah. And so are the other houses in the neighborhood a basement plus 1 level? Is that what?
It just depends. There's been some homes that have been rebuilt, and they're 2-story homes with a basement. The problem with this area is that some of the original homes, when they figured out that basements were a problem because they were below the flood elevation, all of these homes were built prior to when the city did their flood study. So some of the homes are slab on grade in that neighborhood, which currently our zoning ordinance would require variance from. But
Okay.
there's a variety.
And that's probably a side issue. The main issue is this image you kept on the screen. Thanks a lot. And it's really it seems to me the real issue is whether that lower level qualifies as a basement or not. Height is not really the issue. And it seems that whether the lower level qualifies as a basement or not, it turns itself on whether those planters in the backyard qualify for making something above grade or below grade. Why does the city think that the addition of the planters isn't sufficient to say that you know, as you alluded, if you totally re-landscaped the back and just built up a backyard, that would probably work. But the planters don't. What's the difference between the planters and regrading the backyard? Other than obviously there's engineering problems with regrading the backyard due to the flood issues. But assuming that assuming the flood issues didn't prevent that, what's the difference between the planters and simply regrading?
Well, I guess I would say that retaining walls are retaining grade. They're retaining dirt. I don't know if the amount of dirt that's between the wall of the foundation and, it's a very narrow strip. And that's why, I guess I referred to it as a planter box. I probably should not. I think they're viewing it differently. Is something that tall with amount of dirt that's been put in there retaining, is it a retaining wall? Is it an actual retaining wall, retaining grade? I would say no.
I'm willing to bet that I'm the least talented landscape architect sitting up here tonight, so I'm not going to give my opinion on whether it is, and I'm just wondering. One totally side issue, could you go to page 76 of the packet we received?
I don't have that on a slide. Is that something from a previous submission?
I don't think so. It might be actually from one of the neighbors' submissions. Let's just see here.
I have a few slides from the old variance request, but I guess I'm not sure exactly which one.
It shows a drawing of the house immediately adjacent, juxtaposed against this new development.
Would it be this one?
Drawing? It looks a little bit like that, but the existing house is actually a photo of it with a drawing representation of the existing. Okay. Yeah. Can you put that up, Chris? I want to ask you about something on that.
And I don't know if this was supplied by you. Did you create that, or was that?
I created all of those
Okay.
slides.
So
Okay.
you can see that the houses are pretty close together. Between the houses, it looks like there's a trailer. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is the trailer going over the setback line or the lot line?
I don't know.
Okay. It's obviously really close. Okay. I was just wondering. It's just that really something that struck me. I just wanted to call out. That's all my questions, Chair.
Go ahead, Lou.
So would you have a defined number of feet or depth of something that would be, instead of a planter box, which seems quite not deep at all, is there, to be considered a retaining wall? Is there a generally acceptable term or that? No. Nothing.
We've looked at this with engineering and gotten their opinions, and no.
Okay.
But this, and maybe it's a good thing it's brought before all of you, because it doesn't look like a retaining wall. It looks like it's been engineered to hold dirt up against for the purposes of what it needs to do.
Okay, thank you.
So, okay, go ahead, Jimmy.
Chris, I was just curious as to whether the watershed district or the city has, I guess, regulations about having basically piers to support a structure over the floodplain area to allow for the floodplain to still be utilized?
Not in the floodway,
Okay.
because it should be unobstructed. So there shouldn't be anything within that.
Okay. Because I didn't know if that was in the code, because certainly in other states and areas next to oceans, they allow for that, mostly for storms and the likes, but I have seen it around rivers and other things, so just curious.
This has been looked at by the watershed district and our engineering department, and there's a reason why there's only a certain amount of room they have to work with. Otherwise, I know that they absolutely would want to have a little more opportunity,
Sure.
because they've been held very tight to the floodway.
Seems like a case where it could be of use.
It could be a what, Jimmy? Of use, okay.
Of use. That sounded like a B, I'm sorry.
Great, so, yeah. So my question again is just kind of the real basics. So the last time they were in front of us, and I apologize, I wasn't at that meeting, but they were coming in for a variance for the first floor elevation.
Correct.
So this time they don't need
don't
a
need a
variance.
variance.
So they've adjusted it so that they no longer are requesting a variance to the first floor elevation.
Correct. The first floor is the basement now. It's actually much lower than the original entry level of the multi-level home.
Because of your interpretation, saying that's the first floor.
They've submitted it that way. We don't have a definition of first floor. They have a doorway that's going out to the front. We do have a definition of if you tear down a multi-level home, then it's the lowest door that faces the street. And so they're lower than that multi-level home's door that was there previously.
Okay, so that's, okay. So the only issue then this time is the definition, how you're defining basement or first floor.
Whether the basement counts as a story based upon the amount of final grade or ground around the basement.
So then that doesn't allow us to comment on just the overall height and how that doesn't fit with the character of the neighborhood, or, you know, if you feel like it doesn't fit the character of the neighborhood, because they're not coming in for a variance. So that's not,
This
for
is
the
not
discussion.
a variance request, so that criteria does not apply. This is a building permit that's being appealed, and it does meet the overall height requirements, and it's measured from existing grade. So they are actually a little less than 39 feet from grade to the very top of the roof. They could go up to 40 feet.
So the fact that they're coming back in, sorry to keep asking this, I know you want to have something, but so it's changed that they can come back because when it was denied by the council for the reasons that it did not fit in with like the nature of the neighborhood, and and I know that those are the issues that are being brought up too by the neighbors. Mm-hmm. That's not where is our purview with this to.
That variance was denied by the city council, and that may have been part of the reason why they denied it. This is a building permit application, meets all of the requirements. Staff has said that it does not meet, that the story requirement for the basement, that it would be included as a full story, and therefore it's a 3-story house.
Right. Okay, so that if that wasn't an issue, we wouldn't be seeing this at all.
We'd be issuing a permit.
Okay.
Just to summarize quickly,
Yeah.
shortly, there's only one issue in front of you tonight. Just one. Does this basement count as a story or not? Staff has said it does count as a story, and that's what's being appealed.
I just kind of wanted to clarify that. Go ahead.
Those were great questions. I think that was a really key thing to do. I just wanted to ask another factual question I forgot to ask earlier. The debate is about the wall coverage of the level under issue. If these planter boxes were not counted, is that how the 59%
Yes.
number got to?
That's how I'm saying it doesn't meet our requirements. If they are counted, it meets it's not counted as a story, and therefore it's a 2-story home, and we would issue a permit.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Joanne, also.
So to summarize that issue, do the planter boxes change the ground elevation? Is the issue.
Lou?
So the issue is, does it count as a story, and that hinges on whether the planter boxes count.
Planter boxes change the ground elevation, then it's not a story. If the planter boxes do not change the ground elevation, it is a story.
And so who makes that determination? I mean, that's us
You
right
folks.
now? Because that's real clear. Okay. Any other questions for Chris? Okay, thank you, Chris. The applicant, would you like to present?
If I may, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, a couple points of clarification before I make my...
Can we first get your name and address, all that good stuff?
Sorry. My name is Tim Keane, K-E-A-N-E, 60 South 6th Street. I am representing the applicant, the holders. And just a couple of points of clarification before we get to my argument. Staff rather dismissively calls this rear retaining wall a planter box. It's a concrete retaining wall. And the variation between the retaining wall and the foundation is between 2 feet and 9 feet. I think at the back it's at its narrowest point. So, does the construction of the retaining wall and backfilling it with soil establish a new ground elevation? It's not a planter box, it's a retaining wall. And the space between the retaining wall and the foundation is filled with soil. Does that establish a new ground elevation? With all respect to City Attorney Knudsen, where he stated the issue is, does the basement count as a story? That's not the appeal. The appeal is the staff's interpretation of ground elevation for determining that that rear retaining wall, backfilled with dirt, does not establish a new ground elevation for purposes of computing whether or not the lowest story is a basement or a story to the house. And so with that clarification, ground elevation is not defined in the Edina City Code. So we are left to interpretation, rules of construction. And staff, city attorney has made their interpretation. They've applied their determination that this is a planter box, it's not a retaining wall. and that the ground level that is established behind the planter box, as interpreted by staff, does not establish a new ground elevation. It is our contention that it does. That the that new backfilled area contiguous to the exterior wall of the basement does indeed establish a new ground elevation. And so what guides us in questions of interpretation of zoning terms that are not defined? And we have Minnesota court cases that have looked at those questions. And the zoning authority is to look to rules of common usage. And I did supply in my letter to you, which was included in the packet and the record, a discussion of what the Dictionary of Construction Terminology defines as grade, ground level, or elevation at any given point. That the ground level of elevation does vary from point to point on a subject property. We also reference the Merriam-Webster definition as a point is a narrowly localized place having an indicated position at a particular place. So the ground elevation is going to vary as to where it is contiguous to the exterior foundation wall. We're also guided by rules of interpretation by a Minnesota Supreme Court case that well, it was a 1980 case. It's nearly 40 years, and it's still good law. It's the case of Frank's Nursery versus the city of Roseville, where the question of interpreting an undefined term was brought to the city and ultimately appealed to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court issued an opinion that guides cities as it relates to interpretation of zoning. And those principles are outlined on page 2 of my letter to you, and I'll just highlight for your reference that zoning ordinances are to be construed according to their plain and ordinary meaning. They're to be strictly construed against the city and in favor of a landowner in light of the underlying policy goals. And the legal reasoning articulated in that case is that zoning regulations are a derogation or a restriction on property rights. And if there is going to be a question of interpretation, the court said you should fall in favor of protecting those property rights, that less restrictive interpretations should be given weight. And that's something of a bedrock principle in the zoning administration business, and we respectfully argue that the retaining wall on the south side of the building does establish a new ground elevation, one that does render that lowest level a basement and not a first story, and that the calculation of building stories should be measured above the basement, since the basement is, as staff noted, if you include the area behind that retaining wall, it is covered in excess of 50%. We also did include in our letter images of houses recently completed or under construction where foundations are clearly exposed in excess of 50%, but we're not going to rely on those as the basis for this interpretation. We think that the Planning Commission can conclude with a reasonable application of interpretation of plain English terms that the retaining wall does establish a new ground elevation for measuring the computation of basement. There was a letter late submitted into the city, and I would like to make sure it's made a part of the record, from the homeowner at 86 Woodland Curve. Are the planning commissioners in receipt of that? Okay. And I ask that that be made a part of the record. So Mr. Holder is here, and he can ask questions later. I'll stand for questions as well.
Thank you. Questions for the applicant? Go ahead.
I have a few. I'm just going to ask one right now. And I'd like to let other people ask questions, and I maybe might want to come back to other questions I have if no one else has questions. Or I want to talk to you briefly about a large portion, Mr. Keene, of your presentation dealt with deference to property rights and the Supreme Court case. Wasn't the Supreme Court case, though, more about did the use itself fall within a permitted or unpermitted portion of the zoning? For example, one type of retail was allowed in that district versus another type of retail. Why is that analogous to an interpretation of ground elevation? I mean, they seem like different issues.
Well, the question in Frank's Nursery was the question of retail sales and whether that was an allowable use under the district, and the staff interpretation, the city's interpretation was that no, that their restrictive interpretation was that no retail sales are not allowed. This is a question of interpretation. That's the analogy, that we are asking the zoning authority to fill in the blanks where there isn't a definition giving a clear answer to the question. So that's where that case comes into play.
Okay. I have a follow-up on that question, and perhaps the city attorney may speak on it also, but are there any cases that are more on point to this, where a city dealt with some kind of fill in the backyard in a way that was an interpretation of the city zoning ordinances?
I did not find one, and I'm not aware of one, but perhaps Mr. Knudsen is.
Okay, those are all my questions. I'll let Roger, if you want to speak now or later. I'll defer the rest of my questions till later.
Other questions for the applicant? No other questions? Are you done then, or do you have more?
The retaining wall. This isn't necessarily a legal question. What's the engineering purpose for the retaining wall? Is there an engineering or architectural purpose for the retaining wall, or is it just aesthetic, or is it just an attempt to add more grades to comply with the elevation requirements for a basement?
Well, I'm not going to speak to the builder or for the homeowner, and he certainly can answer that question, but retaining walls, where constructed, establish a new elevation for that which is behind it. But
and if I could maybe clarify your first question, the reason why that court case was
First, you have
brought
to do your name and address.
Chad Holder, property owner, 5712 Woodland Lane. The reason why that court case is important is because if city code does not specifically specify code, what it is, then if there's a question of the code, it should weigh in favor of the property owner. And so that court case, because there was not specifically a definition, then the courts favored in favor of the property owner. In our case, there was no definition of grade. We've asked the city, what's your definition of grade? Does it need to be 6 inches? Does it need to be 3? There was nothing. So that's why we're saying, okay, well, then our retaining walls, and yes, only reason is to get to 50%, which we understand and know it's ridiculous. And that's why we put in the packet, there's many other homes that don't meet this requirement, that don't, I would rather not build the retaining wall, and I'm sure the neighbors wouldn't either, because it adds girth to it. So yeah, in my mind, I wish we didn't have to do the retaining wall, but because we have to get what we want, we put in the retaining wall.
Thank you, Mr. Holder.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I did hear that the issue was the plain meaning, and I'm an architect, and the plain meaning of grade is the natural grade. When you put a retaining wall to create an artificial grade, to me that's not plain. So I think that's pretty clear right there. I think that the city is probably more accurate in defining the grade where the existing grade is. The retaining wall, you said that you would prefer not to use it, and yet if you don't use it, then you truly are a 3-story sitting on top of grade. So even though you are saying you don't want to use it, wouldn't it be nice if I didn't have to use it, but the city's forcing you to use it, you couldn't possibly get that through unless you did put it. So I think the retaining wall is really a tactic to try to get to your, so that you can just get that, meet that 50%.
Yeah, sure, and I think that's why, you know, the city planners are there. You bring plans to them, they say, oh, this doesn't meet code. Oh, let me change something in order for it to meet code and pass.
Right.
And so, yeah, we are adjusting our plans definitely to meet code.
Do you ever feel that you're just trying too hard on something that just doesn't fit the site? I'm all for designing for the site. Yeah. Do you feel this building is designed for the site?
Yeah, we have definitely tried our hard. It's a difficult site, as we all know. We've tried our hardest to design so it fits the neighborhood, it fits our family, and it fits the site, definitely. I mean, like you said, we could build 40 feet high. We're not there. You know, we could build bigger. We could, you know, say, and we could tomorrow build a 2.5-story, but that would mean expanding the square footage on our main floor so we could get more on our top floor. But that doesn't, I mean, the neighbors don't want that. We don't want that. I mean, to expand our square footage even more to get, you know, so it would fit a reasonable use of the lot. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Everyone else good?
Yeah, they're good. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so this is also a public hearing, and everyone gets a chance to speak, and you get 3 minutes. So again, state your name and address, and just keep an eye on those little lights. When it turns yellow, I think you get 30 seconds. Is that what's left?
Give me 1 second here to get organized.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm ready. My name's Nick Busalis. My wife and I live at 5704 Woodland Lane. It's one house between us and the subject property. We've lived there for 27 years. Here's an image of the property before the house was torn down. The house is on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side is 5708. In 2017, the applicant submitted this elevation saying this was the front door of the house, which is why it required a variance. In the back, this is the rendering, shows no planter box, no retaining wall, nothing. The applicant has just admitted they're putting in the retaining wall to I call it finesse the code. And in the back, on the north side, I should say, there was no original berm that went around the whole side of the north side, okay? So the city council reversed the decision, and here are the comments that from the city council. And note, they all talk about this property, this house design doesn't fit the neighborhood, okay? And so in 2018, they submitted a plan where they made the front door, this front door that's now on the lower left-hand corner, okay? If you look at this house from the front, and this is kind of at a side angle, no one's gonna say from a common law standpoint that that is the front door. The front door is the one that goes all the way up the steps, which was their original front door. And in 2018, the staff said this is a 3-story building, so it doesn't meet code. So what did they do? In 2019, they finessed the property to stick a bigger berm on the north side. They put in a retaining wall or planter box, however you want to define it. But notice there's a walkout door or patio door that walks out to the existing grade, which is the grade, okay? The grade is not the elevated part where the planter boxes are. Then I took a look at these houses that they submitted in their letter. This is 5837 Brookview. That's the back side they submitted. In the front, this is a 2-story home. Similarly, at 5420 Halifax, it's 3 stories on the back, it's 2 stories in the front. And 5901, same thing here, it's a 2-story home. Clearly, this is a 3-story home any way you look at it. And no one has ever, I think, Susan, you asked a question about the validity of the lines and the numbers. No one since 2017 has disputed what I had put forward. At least the applicant hasn't. This is a view from the top floor for a 6-foot-tall person. We used a drone, and you can see how high up that 3rd floor or the 2nd floor, depending on how you want to look at it. And this is where the 1st floor of the new home would start on the tallest house in the cul-de-sac, which is across the street from.
And I think I have to stop you. You've gone beyond, so this is really interesting, but
okay.
You have to stop.
All right.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Heather Beal. I live at 4236 Crocker Avenue, so about 3 miles away from this neighborhood. I'm here to speak in support of the staff's recommendation to deny the permit request for this 3-story building. In my opinion, during the October 11th, 2017 Planning Commission meeting, when this project was first reviewed, Commissioner Lee presented an excellent option: approve a variance to waive the basement requirement. This seems very straightforward to me because the 1st floor of the new building would not have to be raised more than 6 feet higher than where the 1st floor of the existing structure was to accommodate a basement. This would also eliminate the need to radically alter the height, grading, and drainage patterns on this site, which is adjacent to Minnehaha Creek. And I think we all have reasonable concerns about that. Regardless of where you live in Edina. Also, during the first time this went through in front of the City Council, which was November 8th, 2017, when the project was being reviewed, Councilmember Fisher said, "I haven't really seen any attempts to design a way out of this problem. This is a one-of-a-kind lot, but it's not a one-of-a-kind solution. This lot might not be where this house fits perfectly, so when you have a hardship, you have to find a solution. I would argue that some of the most creative and interesting houses out there are on lots that seem impossible." I agree with Councilmember Fisher. From my plain and ordinary perspective, the design of this house has not addressed the concerns raised by the council members or the neighbors. Generally, it looks like the same house to me. This is in very general terms. In the past 2 years, I would have expected a professional designer to have come up with at least one design that achieves the desires of the future owner, the profit goals of the developer, and most importantly, the intent behind city codes and zoning ordinances, which aim to protect the health, safety, and welfare of all the residents living in our great city. Finally, it doesn't matter to me, those other examples, whether they comply or not. If they don't comply and they somehow found a loophole or slid by the code, a million wrongs doesn't make a single right. That's just my opinion. So I have one quick question. I'm getting the flashing light here. I'm uncertain how wide the actual flower boxes are. So I've heard like 4 feet, but they look a lot narrower. And as a mom, could you tell us, Chris? Because they look tall and narrow, and I wouldn't want a kid walking along them, for safety purposes. So I agree with commissioners. I've written in the building industry for over 30 years now, and I agree with Commissioner Lee's clear definition of grade.
Thank you. So what we'll do is we'll take down your question and we'll answer it later.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Or try to.
Good evening. My name's Ken Potts at 4236 Crocker Avenue in Edina. I'm here tonight to support the staff decision and recommendation. I think that's an accurate assessment of this situation. Could I use the document camera, please, for this? Excuse me. This cul-de-sac is certainly a unique site. It's not out in a far-flung suburb in a cornfield that was turned into development. And that's been identified through both Planning Commission and council meetings, and several solutions have been offered in terms of how to address that. Do you have the document camera? Over the last year and a half, it doesn't seem like the solutions offered by council or planning commissioners have been addressed, but again, we have the same house back here and apparently trying to create a loophole over arguing what is grade. So I've just got a couple of graphics to try and share my point of view. At the back of the house, very clearly grade is where the adjacent land meets the building wall. And I've got that shown here in a red line. I think that's pretty clear. To call something higher than that grade, I would think at a minimum you'd need a walkway width to that grade. And in this case, you would also need guardrails given the height above ground. So this does not seem to be great, in my opinion, any more than putting planter boxes up under the top floor windows and calling them grade. Or in fact, if you're going to go to an extreme, you could take a green roof on a house and say this is grade, this whole house is a basement. How you get Edina's required 2-car garage in there, I don't know. But I think in common sense terms, staff has accurately assessed what grade is, and the fact that this planter and retaining wall that's been built is an integral part of this house foundation. It's not a freestanding retaining wall structure. Really makes it more part of the house than being a retaining wall, and establishes grade at that ground elevation, not what's been added to a thin planter box. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Take your time.
Good evening. My name is Tracy Eichlin Hicks. I live in the property adjacent to the north, 5708 Woodland Lane, the house that's probably most affected by any of this. I've lived there for 25 years. I've been at these meetings since 1997 or excuse me, since 2017 when all of this has come in. And I've stood with neighbors and looking at this, and I understand the argument of Mr. Keene. I understand all the arguments. I've read all of these things. I agree with the city. But there are other things that should be taken into account and are not. And I think, number one, whether it's totally relevant or not, this house does not fit in the character of the neighborhood. When you look at the pictures that were submitted by Mr. Busalis, which I think he's done an excellent job, the house towers over our house. You look down the cul-de-sac and what you see is what I call a McMansion, which we now see on Halifax and 56 in abundance. And they have become the norm. We don't need that here. This is Minnehaha Creek. It's a nice area. The concern obviously is my concern obviously is how it looks, but there's another concern. Because I've sandbagged on these houses. I've stood with neighbors sandbagging when the water came up. I have a real concern about the water flow in that area. And it's raised before, and if you look at the council minutes of 2017, that issue was also raised. The question was asked, will this affect water flows? Nobody could answer. If I had a guarantee that it wouldn't affect me, I guess that might have some effect. But the bottom line is it does. It affects, I've sat here for 2 years while this place was running with weeds and everything else. And Mr. Holder can say what he wants to say. He talks about the neighbors and everything else. It's not very neighborly to just leave this lot the way it is. It's not very neighborly to just not even talk to the neighbors about what's happening. And I think that this is wrong for the city of Edina. I think that after 25 years, I have an opportunity to say something here. And I think a house could be built there. A nice house could be built there. We have no objection to that. But don't build that house here. It's out of proportion, it's out of place, and we don't want it.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak?
Okay, since I'm here, I'll say something.
Okay.
Catherine Busalis, 5704 Woodland Lane, 2 doors down from the house. After 2+ years of waiting for a house to be built there, I have to say I feel bad for the owner. We'd love to see a house there. We'd like to see a house that fits the neighborhood there. We're tired of waiting and looking at all the weeds grow there as well. And we have a house at the other end of the cul-de-sac where we're also sitting on waiting on an empty lot. However, I'm disappointed that we haven't seen any alternate plans. There has to be an alternate plan. Maybe it's not a 4,500 square foot house, whatever size the house is that you're building. Maybe it's a 3,500 square foot house, but can you please just look at alternative plans? I mean, if I'd be really frustrated by now if I was a homeowner, if I couldn't get any alternate plans to build on that lot. And we too are concerned. We've never had a flood in ours. We're fortunate. We're up a little higher than our neighbor, than Mr. Tracy Eichhorn Hicks. But I love my neighbors, and the neighbor across the street who's on vacation and couldn't be here today, they've too suffered through it. They've had to canoe to their backyard to get wet carpet out of their basement. And they too are extremely concerned about the impact on the creek that some of this building will have. So I echo Tracy's comments that we need to be concerned about water flow and how that affects the neighbors, especially now that we're seeing more and more flooding over the last few years. So I just want to say, I guess in closing, that I'd love to see a neighbor move in. I'd love to see a house that fits the neighborhood. We'd like to meet you. We haven't met you yet. We'd like to sit down and have a conversation. But certainly there's got to be other options, and we'd like to see those options at some point if we have a chance to. So thank you.
Thank you.
Real quickly, Marty Freeman, 5637 Woodcrest Drive, right across the creek, have lived there for 25 years. And also speaking for my neighbor, Dee Dee Drays, who lives immediately across the creek from this property. Just want to second all the excellent comments and say that pretty universal feeling among our entire neighborhood to endorse all the comments that have been made, and would really think there is a solution to this, which doesn't involve repackaging essentially the previous proposal that was where the variance was denied. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Public?
Laurie Groats, 5513 Park Place. I hadn't planned to speak, but if you could please put up on the screen here the photo that Chris had that showed the front of the house. On the drawing. Thank you very much, Chris. If you're taking a look, they're saying that this is their front door down in the basement. I bet if you asked anybody in this room, where's the front door of this house? Or if UPS was going to deliver a package to the front door of the house, where's the front door of the house? I think it's up here. If they want to submit this as their house, they're going to have to resubmit, I think, to get another variance. This isn't the front door. It's only common sense. Right up here, this is the front door. They're going to need a variance to do this. Thank you. I'm against this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public who'd like to speak? Let's just...
Am I able to talk again?
I don't. I think when we bring it back up for discussion, we have to close the public hearing though first, so okay. Not yet. So is there anyone else from the public who'd like to speak? Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
I move to close the public hearing.
I'll second. Second, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Motion carries. All right, so I'm going to bring it back to the Planning Commission for discussion. Let me, we'll still give you a chance. First, I know, Chris, there was one of the questions that was asked by about the height of the the planters. Do we have an answer to that, or?
I think it was the depth of it. It's
depth.
Roughly 2 feet or so.
Okay. Okay. The height too.
Oh, the height?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they vary. I would say probably 3 feet, maybe over 4 feet.
Okay. All right. Okay. So it's back to the Planning Commission. Do we want to allow the applicant to respond at this point, or do you want to discuss? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that we have looked at other plans, but our feeling is that the neighbors won't like those plans as well. We want a reasonable use of the land, of the property. I don't think we're asking anything different than any other Edina property owner is able to enjoy for their property. Like I said, you know, we could go up to 40 feet, we could get bigger. I don't think the neighbors are going to like that either. It sounds like the city council and the neighbors don't like the aesthetics of the home, and we've tried to do our best to make it look nice and to fit the neighborhood. The neighborhood is in transition. All right, like in many of the other neighborhoods in Edina, it's in transition. Sure, a 2-story home is going to look taller than a one-story home, which are one-story homes are in the neighborhood. I don't think those one-story homes are going to be in the neighborhood forever. I don't think they're going to be there for very much longer. I don't know how much longer, but it doesn't really matter, but it's a time of transition. Yeah, so we did our best, we thought, to try to plan a decent house.
Thank you. Okay, so just a reminder that what we're discussing is the definition of the elevation. And go ahead, Jimmy.
Well, obviously, aesthetics, character, flooding, all that, you know, there are considerations, but not for tonight. So, as I respect everyone's opinions over those matters, that cannot weigh into the decision before us. For me, just when we've been faced with legal things, you know, there's either the spirit of the law, or are we looking at ordinary terms? And this is just a very obvious case that the spirit is stretched. And creativity is used, which we applaud, but in a way to try to reach the intent of the law, which is not this. The grade is not the top of these boxes. I mean, you could mound soil up the face and count it as basement, but it seems pretty obvious to me that I'm on staff side.
Any other comments, Lou? Look like you're reaching, or?
Yeah, I pretty much agree. It's, you know, I mean, I'm not a landscape architect or even a regular architect, but, you know, retaining wall is something, I mean, I've been looking up some definitions online and Wikipedia and whatnot, and looking at general pictures, and a retaining wall is not 6 inches or a foot or whatever. It's usually much larger than that. It's a way to cantilever a wall to support land, you know, to make more room in a yard, for example. But just pressing a few inches of soil against a wall is not a retaining wall.
Yeah, just briefly, just a comment to all the people who made appearances. I thought the presentations were to the point and respectful. We haven't always seen that. But so my compliments to both sides. I appreciate the discussion. But I think the issue is very simple. It's the question of the grade, and I don't find that I would have a lot of discretion denying a staff position on that. It seems to me, especially important, the flooding issues. That's everything about that whole backyard. What that grade is and how that property is being protected and the consequences. I would not want to go against professional staff. Thank you.
So it seems to me that we're talking about, is the bottom level a basement or is it a first story? Versus the argument that when there's ambiguity, such as there is in our definition of elevation, that we should default to the property owner's rights. And I totally support that. So in my mind, I'm kind of struggling between those two things. I think the individual property rights are extremely important. However, in this case, I think you ask anybody, and it's just what Ms. Grote mentioned. I mean, a very common sense look at that building. I don't think anybody would say that that's not 3 stories. You can't say that's not 3 stories. And so it just doesn't pass the smell test. So it's not a question of aesthetics. It's not whether we like it or don't like it. It's not a question of height. In fact, the property owner can come back with a higher building, and maybe the neighborhoods won't like it as much. But that's not what we're discussing. We're discussing, you know, is it the basement or first story? And what's the definition? The bottom line is it doesn't pass the smell test. This is a 3-story building. So I would support staff.
Anyone on this side have a comment? Go ahead, Ian.
First, I have a couple of questions. And then there's just a lot here tonight. And actually, before I get to my questions, I want to agree with Commissioner Strauss. I thought the applicant gave good presentations, very forthright and very well thought through. I thought the residents gave, we had 8 good presentations by residents with good information about it. I'd like to address some of the comments, actually. But before that, I'd like to get to some, and I agree, I appreciate Commissioner Strauss calling out the respectful nature of the resident comments. They really did stand out tonight, how respectful the resident comments tonight, even in opposition, were. We have seen evenings where this had a really nice tone. That said, now I'd like to get to a couple of my questions. First of all, regarding the front door, I guess this is a question for staff, perhaps City Council. For the purposes of the issue that we're trying to resolve, does it matter which door is considered the front door?
No.
Okay, that was pithy. My second question is flooding. Concerns have been raised about flooding. I don't consider that to be an issue, but it can probably a question for staff. I don't know if that's really a relevant issue, but as I'm interpreting it, flooding could be worsened if a shorter, wider house were built on the site. Is that it had more impervious surface? Is that reasonable, or I'm just testing? Am I missing something?
It's hard for us to speculate on a plan we haven't seen, whether they meet setbacks, whether you even could get a wider footprint. I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay. So the options would be no use, if that were the concern. So I think this is a really tough matter. On the one hand, well, actually, I have another question before getting into my analysis, and this is probably a question for council. One thing that was not discussed as much tonight, it was discussed briefly by the applicant, and then I think it was discussed in more detail by, I believe, Mr. Busalis, was the precedent of other houses that have been built, and whether the city has approved or disapproved similar houses of similar construction. And I actually thought I think it was Mr. Busalis. If it was another resident, I apologize for giving credit to one of your neighbors. Regarding, were those houses essentially very similar to this in that they had a basement that really could have been a first story, but it was approved, so it turned on whether that lower level was a basement or not. Have there been houses that have been approved like that, or were, as the resident said, oh no, those really weren't similar houses that were approved?
Some of those pictures were of rear yards, but there may have been houses that have been approved where this standard wasn't specifically looked at.
Any other? Okay. So I think this is really hard. I think the issues about character, and by the way, I'm not a fan of character unless it's part of a heritage preservation district. I think otherwise character is something that gets determined the night of the hearing, and is very hard to impose in a neutral manner. So I'm very concerned about character, but I don't think that's an issue here. I think the issue here is, are these walls with dirt, do they qualify in the claimed gaps in the Edina City Code? Are they a sufficient workaround to make this a basement? And I think this is a really tough one. I think counsel for the applicant has made some very good points, clearly a well thought through, competent legal argument, which I actually think our opinions are kind of hard. It's almost more of a legal issue. I think we do have to weigh the precedent, and we have to weigh the purpose of these. It seems like I would feel better about approval if the purpose of these serves some purpose other than finding a loophole in the statute. But then again, I would want to hear from counsel about whether loopholes in the statute nonetheless loopholes in the statute. You know, nationally right now, we are dealing with an issue where our president is claiming that the way a statute is written gives him certain powers. Everyone's saying, no, they don't. But some people say, yeah, you know, that was never contemplated, but that might be permissible. And here we are, little Edina. I mean, I think this is a really tough one. I mean, it's more of a legal issue than it is a planning commission zoning subdivision. I mean, so maybe...
In this case, you are the judge. The president can have a position, but ultimately it's the Supreme Court. I'd call you the Court of Appeals or whatever you want. You are the judge of whether this basement counts as a story.
So then I would ask for the legal opinion about, you know, we've gotten staff's opinion about, as a layperson, I mean, we've gotten a legal opinion for the applicant, but we haven't received really a legal opinion.
That's in the report.
Where's the legal opinion
City staff
from the...
and city attorney's interpretation.
So, Roger, it's your interpretation that this does not qualify as ground elevation?
That is correct.
Okay. If I'm going to support that then.
Okay.
Oh, one question though. Yeah, I'll support that. I think that we're going to have a tight issue on this, on the precedent issue though. I think I'm going to support staff on this, but I think that before this goes to council, I encourage city council, the city attorney, to perhaps review whether additional detail need to be furnished to city council, regarding the interpretation of the ground elevation and the precedent issue. I would encourage that, but I will support it tonight based on what was just stated. Support staff.
Great, thank you. Well, I was just going to give another... I was going to say something. Go ahead.
I'm always quick. So to me, this was a very easy decision because the wall is so narrow. The retaining wall is so narrow. However, it perhaps behooves the city to make a decision or come up with, you know, an answer for what is a retaining wall. Because if they come back, I presume they can come back with a 1 foot retaining wall and then a 1.5 foot retaining wall. I mean, at what point does it become? I think now it's so egregious that it's obvious to me anyway that it's not a retaining wall. But if it's 3 feet or 4 feet, or I mean, I guess I have to make that decision, but that makes it a much more difficult decision.
Yeah, I was just going to follow suit. I think it is fairly easy decision, and I would also support what staff's recommending. So, is there a recommendation? Or did you? Oh, you do have comments now?
I just want to say that I think staff did a great job on this. I want to support their work and their findings. There was a lot of pages in that, and also council. I think that is the correct decision. I also just wanted to define retaining wall. Typically, retaining wall is used to hold back soil. So you have a slope, and you make a straight cut, and because you cut now, something's got to hold that soil back. In this case, it was used reverse. It was put up so that they could fill it with soil to push it against the basement wall. That is not a retaining wall in any way. If it is, it's for the wrong purpose. So that's how I always kind of think about retaining. What is it retaining, and what's the purpose? The retaining purpose should be naturally rather than man-made. The need for a retaining wall should be a natural occurrence, not a man-made occurrence. So I would like to move that we accept staff's findings in that we support the denial of this applicant's request for, request for a for his request for an administrative appeal.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second. Any further discussion?
Yeah.
Just go ahead, Jenny.
Just a couple things. Just a reminder, I mean, this is why we're here, right? I mean, there are opportunities to interpret what is written down to every word. And so we're looking at the definitions of ordinary words, and it's just a reminder, we are here to do this. So, and then second, retaining walls, I mean, in this case, the only reason they're used is for man-made purposes, so it's not just natural. They have to get the building up above a floodplain, so if you're putting in fill, sometimes you have retaining walls, not just to deal with natural effects, so it's usually a balance of cost. People try to avoid them because it costs a lot, so there will be ways where people might try to achieve closer to a code, and I think that's why we're here to decide this tonight.
So there's been a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, so next is a sketch plan review for Vernon Avenue Lane and Ollinger. Where am I? Sketch plan review for 5835 Vernon Lane.
Okay, thank you, Chair, members of the Planning Commission.
All right, you guys, everybody, thank you.
Before you, our next request is a sketch plan. Oops, that's not working. Okay, so this property is located at the intersection of Ollinger and Vernon. As you can see, the property, looking at the underlying aerial, it's a vacant property that was platted with for 5 townhome units.
Just a second, sorry, Carrie. You guys, everybody, Carrie's presenting. Thanks. Okay, go for it.
Thank you. We are also looking at a portion of the single-family home located at 5705, this back portion. The property in question has a couple of zoning designations. PRD1, Planned Residential District. That's for the Old Vernon Townhome Association. Again, this entire area was rezoned and platted for detached townhomes. Again, this site remains vacant today. We do have some duplex zoning to the west. There's that little auto repair station on the north side of Vernon, but primarily single-family homes to the south. This site is guided for low-density attached housing, which allows a density of between 4 and 8 units per acre. And that single-family home, of course, is guided for low-density residential. So again, this was the approved plan for the overall development. This vacant parcel is part of the townhome association. So anything that happens on this on this property in question needs the approval of the association. So what the applicant is proposing here is to construct 5 villa homes. 2 of them would be located on that single-family residential property. And what they'd like to do on the far west corner, right on the corner of Ollinger and Vernon, is do a 10-unit condo building. It would be 3 stories. So just to look at some of the massing, this would be the condo building. Here's Vernon and Ollinger with the villa homes to the east. I'll let the applicant go through that in a little more detail. So what's required here would be a comprehensive plan amendment to re-guide just that single family portion where those 2 villa homes would be constructed. So the comprehensive plan amendment, they would need to rezone that PRD1 to PRD3 for the condo building. I'll show you a graphic here in a minute. and then rezoning from R1 to PRD1 for the townhomes. They would need to replat the Oldie Vernon 3rd edition. They would need a revised site plan for that 3rd edition. So we're increasing the total units there from 5 to 15. Again, that would account for the condos. And importantly, again, the Oldie Vernon Homeowners Association needs to agree to the proposed plans. In order to do that, 75% favorable vote of the association needs to take place. So before we considered any formal application for this project, that would need to occur. Again, the city is bound to an agreement that we can only issue building permits that are consistent with that, with the 5 townhomes that have already been approved. So to quickly show, so this would have to be rezoned from PRD1 to PRD3. That's the zoning district that would allow a 10-unit condo building. This would be the rezoning and comprehensive plan site from R1 to PRD1 to allow that attached housing, and again, the comp plan amendment. So with that, a number of variances would be required, primarily for that condo building, and this graphic would demonstrate a little better. So you can see the proposed footprint of the condo building. The red line indicates the required setbacks. So the setback of the condo building would be 10 feet from the lot line from Vernon. The setbacks for the villa homes are relatively minor. 20 feet is required, so they would need a variance down on the south side. And because we're changing zoning districts here, setbacks would be needed to the rear lot line, so you can see we would have some intrusions into that required setback. So a number of setbacks would be required. Also for the PRD3 site, the lot coverage variance would be needed for that as well. So some of the issues, again, I mentioned the vote of the association. The overall density here is 5 units an acre over the entirety of the development. So it's it is consistent with the comp plan that guides this from 4 to 8 units. Again, we do need to amend the comprehensive plan for that portion of the single family lot. With that, one thing I might, just for consideration of the Planning Commission, if this is, so with the affordable housing policy, the policy kicks in at 20 units, so this is 15, so it falls below the policy. But there are rezonings and comprehensive plan amendments, so this might be a good spot to do possibly 1 unit as affordable housing. I just throw that out there for a discussion point with this project. So with that, I can stop there and answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yes, Carrie, the view you have up, so the very southern part, I assume that's south, required setback. What is there, so the lot that's adjacent to appears to be cut off. Is there anything there?
Let's see. Yeah, so this graphic shows it better. So here is where 2 of those villa homes are proposed. So they're single family homes to the south.
Okay, so the setback, I mean, it would affect homes with lots, I mean, lots with homes on them. I see, okay. Good, thank you.
Carrie, it seems like so much of this, well, everything's contingent on the homeowners association, and it's 75%. And what does that entail? Is it 75% think, yes, it's okay in general, or is it every single detail that they're approving? And then at what point, like, I'm curious that we're talking about it now when it's not approved yet. I mean, why don't we just talk about this after we know that the homeowners association is okay with it?
Yeah, that would have been my preference. It is a sketch plan. I've let the homeowners association, they're aware of this. They met last night, the applicant and the board of directors. They submitted the letter that I had sent out this afternoon and was included in the packet as well. So they've provided some comment, but they haven't taken a vote or taken it to the full board. So the idea is the applicant has a purchase agreement with the property owner who's out of state. And they've put extremely tight timeframes on them just to have for a decision for them. And it really doesn't fit into our entire process. So we thought we could at least get ahead of the sketch plan, do planning commission this week, city council next. We would not go further with any kind of formal application without that consent of the association.
And then just a quick follow-up, the 75%, does that mean are they kind of approving what we see right here, or are they going to be talking about 12 feet here versus 10 feet there? I mean, is it high level?
I'm sure they'll want to talk about all of those details. They're going to want to be comfortable with really every aspect of it. Yeah. I think from the developer's perspective, they would like to include these 5 units as part of the association and build to all of their standards, and then pull the condo out of the association to kind of separate itself. So the association would still have a total of 28 units. That was the original proposal, but they would just take this portion out.
And is the current property owner at all involved in the current land or houses in the homeowner association? But they were originally.
It was a separate property owner.
Okay.
But when they went through and got the city entitlements, they were to become part of the association and abide by all of the covenants for the rest of the association.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Ian.
Carrie, one discussion we've had up here over the last several months for various proposals is the idea of bringing a building closer to the street. And there's various viewpoints on that, but in thinking about it, most of those discussions have been regarding more, let's just say urban or commercial portion. In land, it's more urban or commercial portions of Edina. This is more of a, for lack of a better, more of a suburban, more of a residential portion of Edina. Are there places in kind of the western side of Edina that's not necessarily in a commercial zone where buildings are closer to the street like this one is proposed?
Yeah, boy, I can't think of any circumstance. It seems in this case they're pulling it to the street because the site is so small. 10 feet to the lot line, probably 20 to Vernon. Seems a little tight in my opinion, but.
Thanks, Gary.
Any other? Go ahead. Go ahead, Jimmy.
I was just going to say a block west or less than that, there's that Kevin Keys Auto, and then there is some higher density. Immediately next to it, you can see them right here. And they are relatively close to the road. I don't know how close they are to their own property line or if it compares, but it's reasonably close. I mean, there's these 2 right here. And this is, I mean, it's within a block. Well, 169, right?
Go ahead, Sue.
Carrie, can you go back to the original approved platted thing, drawing? I think you mentioned there is that part that's called phase 2. Is that vacant now, or has a house on it, or?
This piece here?
Yeah, though actually south of that, isn't it?
This is a single family home.
Okay, so that's not the same as mentioned earlier. That's not part of the association.
It is not.
So all of this hinges on the applicant buying up those properties and planning commission and city council being willing to change that zoning.
Yes. So this property owner is. I believe there's another purchase agreement involved to purchase the back half of that property.
The back half.
So yes, they would have to be an applicant in this proposal.
Okay. And what were you recommending for the change on that parcel there? You said PRD?
Yeah, it would be the same zoning as the rest of the district, which would be PRD 1.
Okay, and currently it's R1.
Correct.
And this is the drawing here. It says future phase 2. Is that part right there? Yeah, this whole thing here. The 2 villa homes all the way out to Ollinger, where it says future phase 2, 3 floors, 9 units.
No, that's just describing what's above it.
Oh, this?
I don't think. I think this is actually describing this.
Bring your pointer down to the.
Maybe not.
Keep going. Or
Oh, in
there.
here.
Yeah, what's that?
Yeah, so according to that, they may want to do some future, maybe another condo building. That again would take another comprehensive plan amendment.
Okay. Thank you.
Carrie, I think this is in the map, just because I'm looking at this drawing right now, right across the street, is that Bredesen Park or Bredesen Park? Just refresh my memory on that.
Across the street.
Residential? Across Ollinger? Oh, that's more residential.
Yeah.
Bredesen's further down,
Yeah.
farther down. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, these are duplexes.
Okay.
And then the single-family homes to the south.
Perfect. Thank you, Carrie.
All right, so just,
Can I have a question?
What?
Over here.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So and I'll get back to you.
If I could go back to this, it was my understanding that the single-family home, they wanted to remain in their home, so that wasn't part of the request. I think they're indicating here maybe in the future that they might be back at a later date.
Okay, go ahead, Lou, with your question, and I'll follow up.
Okay, I'm still confused by the bottom right of this, where the property lines are, because it says 20-foot setback, but it looks like the house is, or the villa is meeting that. I'm a little confused.
But the required setback is 25 feet.
Oh, okay.
So you can kind of tell here, the villa homes here that are existing, those are set back 25 feet and they meet the requirement. They're suggesting that they would like a 20-foot setback, and that would require a variance.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
All right, so can you go back and show what was approved? Because I'm reading that homeowners association letter. Where did I see that?
So this is what could be built on that site today.
Okay, those are the 5 properties and what, now quickly flip to what they're proposing. And
so they would essentially take the 2 units that have been proposed or approved for this site, put them down on the single-family property.
Which is outside of the...
Which is outside of the homeowners association.
Part of it's outside of it.
Right.
Okay. All right, and their letter, it looks like they're sounding like they're not in favor. Is that what I read? That does not support any proposal or rezoning which would permit the construction of anything other than single-family villa homes.
That seems to be the position, yes.
Okay.
They're acknowledging that this plan does not meet what's been approved for the site.
Okay, so we're already kind of getting a feel for...
Yep.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah, just curious, is that random parking thing, I don't even know what you call it, parking bump out, is that city run or is that part of the development?
That's part of their development proposal.
And I guess it'll be a question for them. I'd rather see that come out and the villa homes go straight into that property, but it seems odd that there's like 8 spots kind of away from all the other ones, unless it's just to play in the empty park.
I think it is.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Joanne's question, because I'm a little confused about the where we are in the time on the process with the Oldie Vernon people. So it sounds like Oldie Vernon, I had understood that Old Vernon had already issued a definitive, said, no, we're not going to approve this because we want only single homes. But, obviously we just got that letter today and we all had other things to do. And is that, but I understood your presentation tonight as saying, well, that the approval of the homeowners association, that might have been the letter from the board or the board's attorney, but it still needs to go to the homeowners association for final approval?
It does.
And so was that letter more, this is a statement of our position today, and this is what could even be a recommendation, what they're going to give to the homeowners association, but the applicant still has the opportunity to try to persuade the homeowners association to approve this? Is that kind of where we're at?
Correct, yeah.
Oh, okay. Thanks, I was confused. Thanks.
And just to follow up, because there's been a lot of discussion, and I think I already forgot what you said. What were the other issues that staff has, other than the setbacks? Were there others?
The affordable housing, if that's a discussion point. Some of the issues that we identified is that 10-foot setback to Vernon seemed a little tight. There is a building coverage variance. Some of the variances to get this building on the site are pretty large.
Okay.
When you look at the overall density, just the number of units for the whole project, that does seem reasonable.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I had a follow-up on that. Thank you for bringing that up. Could I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Yeah, that lot coverage, is that, I guess that's for us to decide whether it's fair, right? You're just saying the lot coverage could work kind of like using a bank of, of less than maximum lot coverage from before. We could create more lot coverage now, but just balance it by the gains from the past, right?
Yeah, if we looked at the project as a whole, building coverage isn't an issue, but when you look at it just for that one site where they're asking to be rezoned from PRD 1 to PRD 3, that would allow a 10-unit building, the coverage is 0.37. 0.3 is 30% is the requirement, and they would be proposing about 37% there.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you, Joanne, for letting me ask that follow-up question. Thank you.
Any other? Lou.
One more. I'm on a roll tonight. I'm looking at a document that starts with A1. It's like A1 concept site plan, which might be slightly updated compared to that, because if you look on the left-hand side next to, Ollinger Road, it's got like 6 parking spaces that are parallel, and I'm looking at something that shows an ADA spot and.
Yeah, I should have updated my graphics. Okay. I think the landscaping that's shown kind of gives it away. That's the updated version, if that's the one you're looking at, where there's more trees and less parking spaces here.
Okay.
They went from 6 to 4.
Okay.
It's an improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions for Carrie? Okay, great. Thanks, Carrie. So as the applicant, would you like to speak? Or it's just a sketch plan, yeah. Hi.
Hello, Commissioners. Partners. We have been working on this plan for quite some time. However, the landowner has forced our hand to move a lot quicker than we normally would with something like this. We have met with the HOA board, and we're hoping to have some time to sit down with the rest of the homeowners of that association to work with them very closely to develop a project that makes sense for their neighborhood to get the rest of this land developed. Financially, we need the density of the condo building to make it make sense. To only build villa homes here does not financially work. I know there's been some concern that I've heard just tonight with, the setback to the single-family homes with the villa homes right over here. We're working to see if we can just orientate all 5 of them right along Vernon Lane and break up, as Jimmy talks about this awkward parking bump out thing, break that up a little bit so it's not parking lot feeling, but spread that out a little bit better. We're looking forward to input from the HOA as to how that might work.
You want to kind of walk through the rest maybe, or do you guys want to hear a little bit more? I know you don't have a lot of details because of the sketch plan, but if you just kind of want to walk through.
I'm going to invite Ken Piper, our architect, up here too to help with this. So as you may or may not know, I'm also the developer of Edina Flats, which is in Kellogg and Valley View. And that kind of helped us get to what this condo building is and the size of the units that we have there. It seems to be what the people are looking for in Edina square footage wise, that 1,500 to 2,000 square foot size units. There's people that have expressed interest in not wanting to live in a big condo building or big apartment building. They like these smaller projects, but they don't want a yard, they don't want the maintenance that comes with a home. And then there's also people that have expressed interest in, we don't want to live in a building, we want our own house, but we don't want the hassle of taking care of our lawn and plowing our driveway. We'd rather have that all handled by somebody else, which is what Vernon Lane is. The existing association is wonderful in that respect, and I don't think they have any trouble selling those houses when they come up for sale, and they for sure want to get more of those in there because I think it's a wonderful product type. On the unfortunate side, the land is priced as what it is. The sellers have negotiated hard with us, but the best we could get to was the price we got, and the only way to make that work was to add some density to it. And we've worked very closely with a neighbor to the south as well, who was quite reluctant to not make any rash decisions. She for sure didn't want to sign up to move out of her house yet. We were the only ones that approached her that said, well, what if you could stay in your house? And we don't need your whole property today. We can build the 5 villa homes without your entire property. She really, really thought that was a wonderful solution to a problem that no one else had brought up to her. And she's been just wonderful to work with, and we're just trying to make this happen. I know it's unconventional that we come to you guys this quickly. We'd love to get your feedback so that when we meet with the rest of the homeowners association, we have your comments as well. The last thing we want to do is come back to you guys with a plan that the homeowners like and have you guys say there's no way that this is going to happen. So we're trying to kind of do this all at the same time, mostly because the seller has put some time constraints on us and we'd like to get this done, but I understand it's unconventional.
Good evening. I'm Ken Piper with Tannic Architects, 118 East 26th Street, Minneapolis, and thank you for your time. I think the process in looking at it, sometimes we like to think that the process is made here, and I think you can see some of the complexity of this, that we are actually depending on you, and therefore this session is really important in terms of the sketching aspect of it, to get thoughts that we can then take and understand this back and forth and incorporate in what we're doing. So I think here, and one of the commissioners alluded earlier that the plan may be deferred a little bit, and this is our most current plan, and it's just again it's our work in progress in trying to address some of the site issues. I think some of what we talked about with the villa homes going along Old Vernon Lane here, these are actually surface stalls that are part of the association at this point, so there's another group of them back in this area too. You can see here that we're starting to play with, I think the vegetation on the site is going to be really important as we look at this. And so, you know, I think Patrick also mentioned as well that we're playing around with the But this is our attempt here at the villa homes, but that perhaps there's another option that would kind of align them all on Vernon. I think by and large here as we get to the condo building, and just a little bit on that, then we're talking about a 3-story. We're talking about a total of about 40 feet is what we're looking at there. We're talking about probably about 70 feet by about 95 by about another 70. And we're talking about 2 levels that will come to the edge here, and then we'll ease at the 3rd level with about a setback of 8 to 10 feet. On the Vernon side, on the Olinger side, and as well on this side here. So then we're playing with the mass as we kind of look at this. We will have 4 units on the 1st floor, 4 on the 2nd, and then the setback or recess of the 3rd floor will account for 2, what we propose to be 2 units on the top. Our parking will be fully submerged, and at this point we're showing 4 service parking stalls here. The total requirement for the parking, they have to be a certain number out on site, and then the requirements for the units. They total 20 here, so by code then we would be looking at 8 interior, 12 interior and 8 on the exterior. We are proposing 20. We're just changing that a little bit in that that'd be 4 and 16. In addition to that, we have actually 6 additional tandem stalls that we're able to incorporate in here. So actually, if you were to count, and we understand that the city doesn't view tandems as 2 stalls, but in actuality, then physically, we'd be really looking at 26 parking stalls total. Again, the character of the building, we're talking about a 40-foot height. We're playing around a little bit with the massing, and we're starting to show on there maybe a little bit of what this could look like. This is the view on Old Vernon and Vernon, right at the corner. You can see that there's some existing trees and growth here, and we're looking down along Vernon Avenue. This is what we hope to achieve then, looking with the, you can see here 2 of the villa units, and the condo building would be further away here. So it just starts to give you a view of kind of moving along Vernon and some of the things we can do with growth. These would be new trees here. Again, something that becomes a little revealing to us as we look at this. This is Oldie Vernon here, and looking back toward the site. These are the parking stalls we just were referring to there. And so start looking at the 2 villa homes then that would be kind of toward the corner of Vernon and Oldie Vernon. The 3, correct, yeah, so you start to see those there. And beyond then is kind of the view from Oldie Vernon here toward, looking toward the condo building. So some of these things are starting to reveal. We'll develop those further, but just thought we'd give you kind of our, as we're moving along here, sort of what we're seeing in terms of, how this will come to play.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the, go ahead, Sheila.
What kind of price points would you have for the condos and the villas?
So the villa homes would start between 1.2 and 1.4 million, depending on finish level. We'll have a base finish level, obviously, but higher finish levels would be a little more expensive. The condo building would be consistent with that of the Edina flats, price per square foot wise. $450 to $500 a foot, which brings it between, probably starting at 700-ish, going up to potentially over $1 million on the top floor.
And sorry, just remind me, what's the typical square footage of the Edina flats?
Edina flats range from 1,500 to 2,500 feet.
So a little bigger.
And this we're
but-
keeping a little bit smaller because the 2,500 foot units, we're finding that there's not as much demand for those.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
I have one big question. So what's happening to the trampoline?
That is the homeowner's, I think it's her sister's.
Okay. No.
She's going to take it back to her house.
I have a bunch of more comments, not really questions, so I can save them till we have a discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, were you saying something about tandem parking spaces? I'm not sure I understood that.
Commissioner, I was just kind of giving you a preview of the parking and what we're finding. So the requirement for the site then, looking at the condo building, would be 12 stalls, interior stalls, and 8 exterior, because the city of Edina requires a certain number on the for outside parking. So that's a total of 20, and we are saying that we would be providing those 20. However, we are proposing 16 indoors and 4 out on site. In addition to that, of those 16 that we'd be providing interior, there are 6 of those that are actually tandem spots. So if you counted the tandem spots as 2 spots, yeah. If you counted them as 2 spots, then there would be a total of 26 parking spaces, 4 out on site and 22 in covered interior below grade.
Gotcha, okay. And then one question about the, I walked the property this morning, and on Ollinger, there's several really large, beautiful trees. Is there any possibility that those would be kept in the plan? Or?
The large, beautiful trees that are there are going to stay there.
Great, thanks.
Yes, thank you. I think it's maybe one is, so Vernon Lane comes off of Vernon Avenue. Is that a private street?
It is.
Okay, so that one view, I think it's buried under the sheets you have. It showed the Vernon, that one there. Yeah, that one there. So that's what kind of caught my eye is you have a sidewalk that's coming up. That's coming up Vernon, correct? And then it just terminates. Then it's going into Vernon Lane. So it just sort of terminates there.
The sidewalk continues going down Vernon Avenue.
Yeah, and that's a public. I mean, that's public sidewalk. And so that street, Vernon Lane, is very different then as a public.
It is.
Yeah, okay. I don't know if that determines what we could expect to see in a private street. I don't know, Carrie, if this, do we see sidewalks or?
Excuse me. What we've been trying to do is turn those into the boulevard-style sidewalks, pull it away from the street, and put a green strip that would separate it. So that could be something that we would look at as part of a, when we get into the details of the site plan, is improving the pedestrian movement in the area.
Okay. But I could see an expectation that that public sidewalk on Vernon, would be updated when that whole lot would, I'm not sure what it would look like as you proceed northerly. I know we're trying to get sidewalks in when we can, but.
We're definitely looking at it as an amenity, especially for the condo building, because the access to both Bredesen Park and up towards Jerry's, with the wonderful bike lane that's there and the sidewalk, you can now get from Vernon.
Yes, that's a good
places.
point. Sure. Yeah, I mean that's an important path.
And I believe there's also sidewalk work that is being done right in this area here currently, I believe. It's either being put in or
I think
something's
they're putting,
happening.
it looks to be, I don't know, maybe Carrie does, but the transition between the street and the sidewalk with the grippy metal pads that
Yes, sure.
looks to be what there's happening now.
Okay, thank you.
Along Vernon itself, there's a lot of trees and brush. What's going to happen there? Are you removing that and replace new trees, or?
Yes, most of that brush there is buckthorn and other invasive, not very nice tree type stuff. So we'd be replacing that with, I don't know the species, Ken, do you?
Undetermined at this point, but good species.
Solid, real trees, not scrub brush.
Okay, thanks. Thanks.
Any other questions for the? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so bring it back to the Planning Commission for discussion.
Is this where we give our comments?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So we just give our thoughts on. Yeah, don't go away.
Yeah, don't leave.
So what gets complicated about this is we can give you great ideas, but it doesn't really matter
You can
because the
sit- you
homeowner
can sit
association,
down.
right? So with 75%, it's difficult. But I would just say, it seems to me you're providing a real need, because what you say, I mean, I think we probably all know people who live in bigger homes and they're empty nesters, and they're looking for something smaller. Don't necessarily want to move out of Edina, and there's limited opportunity to move someplace else if you want a low maintenance home. So I do appreciate you're providing you're filling a need. And the variety of, having both condos and villas is attractive. You mentioned the price points, which seem to me, they're a little on the higher end. But I would think if I were a member of that homeowners association, I was sitting there thinking, what is my incentive to approve this? I've got a great open field, and if I approve it, there goes my park. So what's their incentive? And I think it's only if you do super, super high quality, and obviously then they get to leverage their homeowner fees across more units, which is a benefit. But maybe, I don't know what those numbers look like, but the best incentive is you build something that's so high quality that it's maybe even attractive to the people in the villas who might want to live there, the current residents of that street. So I think in this case, the aesthetics are huge. Like, you just have to make it really nice. And what you've shown so far, the rain gardens, the pond landscaping, keeping the large trees, it's all in the right direction. I personally, appreciate the invisible parking underneath. And, you probably do need some surface parking, but minimal. You've got to have bike parking. And you've got to have, as much connectivity, I would think, biking and walking, sidewalks and stuff like that. Yeah, so I mean, personally, I don't live there. I'm not part of the homeowners association, but my opinion is that it would be a benefit to the city if it's really well done.
Hi, Jimmy.
I want to echo just about everything Sheila said. And they have tandem parking, so tandem bikes, Lou. Kidding. When I first saw these plans, I don't know, I didn't feel as good about them until kind of going through this narrative and hearing your story, especially addressing the two villa homes that are kind of on their side with the weird entrance. I think addressing that and making it match all the other ones is key. And as for the more density on the corner, again, I was reluctant to see that, just because in R1 settings, we don't necessarily want to be that that's not the place necessarily for more people to live. However, I did mention, and the more I thought about it, if you pull up a map, just across the street, down less than a block, there is that style of living in quite abundance, and it fits well. And I think even those might be 4 stories, although it's like a roof is blended into the top story of one of them. So this being only 3 stories stepping back, I think, is way more palatable of a move to soften that corner and not make it seem so abrupt when people are driving down. So I'm in favor, surprisingly, of what you're doing there, and I think it offers a good variety of living choices next to that park, as well as in proximity to walking up to Jerry's or biking there. I think that's in the right direction for the city. A couple suggestions to kind of tie on to what Sheila said, at least for connecting people and bicycles and what might appeal to the neighbors of the villas already. They do have that open space there, but I think if you can connect them better to where they might be going quicker. So getting to Bredesen, people wouldn't want to have to walk up this curvy sidewalk to the north to then head back down Vernon to the southwest. If you could figure out some way a path meanders maybe between 2 of the homes and next to the condo to get out to Vernon on that side, I think that'd be a pleasant type of amenity that other residents would like, but they'd appreciate that because that's getting them. You wouldn't have to necessarily go through someone's yard to get there if there's actually a path. And the northwest corner of that intersection, there is a path by that Kevin Keys Auto. So it kind of there's a chance to kind of match up to what's already going on in the area. I think what you're doing is good. The design's key, and I think minimizing with a flat roof like you did at Edina Flats is the right way to go. It just will soften that density and fit better into the neighborhood. So I like where you're going, and those are my only suggestions as of now. One other thing. I could see some contention from the villas just of separating that property to get more density and like, hey, no, this was originally platted, to be the 5 single family townhomes on the top. But if you look at that just from like a geographic overview, the aerial view, those 2 on the western side that are actually on Olinger Road just seem out of place because you access not through the Vernon Lane, and they just don't even seem connected to that part. So I like that whatever's on the corner be something different. So I think that's a good recommendation to that town. Like, you have this whole loop. It makes sense to keep all of that the same, but to have 2 kind of separate, it doesn't even seem connected. So I think that's just good. I think having different variety there is in the better direction. So I like how creative you got and worked with the homeowner of separating the property, and I think it's just going in the right direction. It's the creativity we like to see, not like the last hearing we had.
Thanks, Jimmy. Got some Sue.
Thanks for an opportunity to weigh in a little bit here. So I think that I do think that the layout of your townhomes actually is an improvement over what they platted. So I think that makes sense to follow that curve. What I think that you have a chance to do here is treat this parcel as its own community. I realize that it's part of this homeowners association, but I think they're going to kind of see it as something also separate and unto itself. Because you have this prime corner location, I think that's going to really take some time to think about how to best finesse it. The massing right now that you're proposing on the corner feels a little too heavy right now, just a little too chunky. I know that you're doing it partly for the economics, but I might pitch this idea, and again, I don't know how the homeowners association will deal with it, but if there was a way to actually even make units smaller and increase the number of units overall for the whole development. The reason I say that is I don't know if you're familiar with Ross Chapin, the architect who does what we call zero curb housing. So he does a lot of pocket neighborhoods, and this property just sort of feels like a pocket, it's waiting to be a pocket neighborhood. It's usually centered around some kind of type of central courtyard or landscaped area that everybody shares, but the homes are side by side and very generally small. I'd say about 1,000 square feet, some even go less. It's geared to 1- and 2-person households, which is what we have such a big need for here. We're finding millennials are buying houses without being married, or they'll buy it with a partner. Just they buy the house before they're even married, with intent possibly to get married, we don't know. From the other end, we have the seniors who are looking to so-called downsize, and again, they're just one or two people. So I think there is a real market for a different type of housing. I realize you have done the Edina flats, and that's given me a lot of time to kind of see how that's coming along. That is similar to this in that you had the corner and put the more concentrated 3-story on the corner. I'm still kind of assessing that, whether that was successful. Definitely, if you are going to do a higher story building, it needs to be out on the busier trafficked area. So I think you've got that location right. It's just the form, even of Edina Flats. I'm trying to think something about the pitched roof forms on the interior side that are just so much more appealing, and it got a little lost when we brought it out to the corner. So it would be nice if they sort of looked more like they belong together. It sort of feels like it's a separate building on the corner with the units. This, you have a chance, like I said, to really create a community. If you are going to do that, I think it's going to be important that there is some cohesive thread that runs through that, and maybe it is really tied by that landscaping. Nail down that site plan, and I think that you could sell literally the whole thing, your phase 3 as well as your phase 1, because people are just going to say, we want to see it all done. You know, I think I can understand that you don't know yet what you can show on that phase 3, but I think you got to grab the whole piece and develop it, and in its entirety. That's what's going to sell it. And again, if we could get, I too agree that it feels a little high on the price point. I know you got the economics, but maybe there's some formula in there if you could bring it down even a little further, make smaller units and put a few more. That might be one more piece of the puzzle. But a great start, and I'm curious to see how that goes. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. And just for clarification, it's phase 2, right? Yeah, that's cool. So, 3 floors. I know, I keep looking at that too, so it's easy mistake. Go ahead.
Thank you. So there's some nice things about this idea. I actually, one thing that's interesting here is I'm very interested in the fact that you want to do a condo. People just don't come before us and say they want to do condos. I meant to ask you, are the laws different for condos than townhouses? But I think condo would be a nice addition to the mix of properties available in the city. I think there are people who would like to own condos, and I appreciate you bringing that forward. I am concerned about the variance, the setback variance for that building. And I'm actually, even though it is scrub trees, and I like you're putting in new trees, I'd rather keep what we have. And I'm going to, some of my comments are going to be based on the fact that I've biked and ran by that property at least dozens of times, if not hundreds, if not more than 100. So Vernon is a busy road, and the city has put in a walking, jogging path and a small bike lane there. And having been down it during rush hour dozens of times, there's a real crowded, kind of claustrophobic nature to it, and I'm worried that the nature is driven by the cars on your left and the the path is kind of narrow as it is, and I'm worried that bringing the building closer to the path and then removing the foliage for a period of years will negatively impact the feel of biking and walking on that path. So I would rather see the condo not have such a setback. I would actually, if necessary, I would actually be okay with, I'd probably be more okay with a height variance there if that was needed to get it done than a setback variance, because I think it is needed to keep the building away from the street. Let's see. I'm concerned with the lot coverage issue. I don't love the idea of, let me rephrase this. I'm generally in favor of limited lot coverage, limited impervious surface, and I'd rather see something that has less surface. Again, perhaps lower setback, maybe a taller building to accomplish your goals would enable that. I don't want to use the bank that's been built up over the years of low surface coverage and exhaust that. I think surface coverage is going to be a continuing issue for the city. Let's see. I like your idea, even as you explained it tonight, changing from your drawing. I know you're doing this real time, which is also very impressive about the villas, as several commissioners up here have spoken about reorienting them and maybe using some of that parking. I mean, I look at that parking, I look at the drawing, and it probably made perfect sense at the time they built it. It almost looks like the way you lay out parking at a national park. You know, you're driving around, you get a little parking spot, or, you know, it was a community parking area for visitors, and it probably made a lot of sense at the time of building. But I like the way you're going to amend it. I hope you can work this out with the homeowners. Let's see, a couple other things. One thing that I think is not just the price point to your property, and I think you should market it based on whatever you think the market will bear price-wise, but I am kind of concerned about, I think that a lot of what's driving the number of units is the price point at which you're able to purchase the land, and I'm sitting here just kind of confused about that, because it seems like a win-win or a lose-lose thing with you and the current landowner, because right now the landowner is just paying taxes on that land, versus they have, at some price they can sell it to you and you can build something, and they're going to be way ahead of where they are, and you'll be way ahead. And I just wish it would come down a little bit that would enable you to not need such setbacks and lot coverage variances. Finally, find some kind of win-win price. I know that's way out of our scope, but finally, one thing that Carrie mentioned we haven't talked about is affordable housing, and I really wish we could find a unit of affordable housing. As I look at it, by the time phase 1 is done, so maybe there'll be 38 units on the property. I mean, through a series of development, isn't our affordable start at 20 if someone builds 20? And so I think, you know, one affordable housing unit I think would be very nice to see, and would be a real good touch in coming forward. Those are my comments.
Well, just to add on, I kind of like this plan too. I like the mix of the condo and the villas. I agree. I'd like to see you try to meet the setback from Vernon. I think you have room for it, and actually, you know, with those parking stalls that you're providing, I would even see reducing that or approving the reduction in the required parking, if that would allow you to reduce some of the, you know, lot coverage, but also to pull the building back from Vernon. I love Jimmy's idea about connecting through the site over to Olinger. I think that's a great idea, just to provide pathway through there. Other than that, I like how it looks. I wish you luck with the homeowner association. It'll be nice to hear what, you know, they come back with, because our hands are a little bit tied with what they say, right? So, go ahead, Lou.
Okay, I'm going to start with transportation because at one point, one of you mentioned the great bike lane there, and a few other people have mentioned biking and walking. I walked through this area in kind of the neighborhood this morning to look around what's there. First of all, I'll say that a 40-mile-an-hour road should probably not have a painted bike lane. So that's the city's fault, it's not yours. And it's a better than a 4-lane road, but it's really not appropriate. As an example of that, there was a middle-aged man riding a bicycle, and he was riding on the sidewalk. Not far away on Blake Road, a woman was biking on a very pretty bike in a very small bike lane, because I think it's a quieter road. I also saw a number of distracted drivers glancing down at their phones despite the new Minnesota law, so I don't know that that's really helping anything. So people feel safer, I think, when they have, as Carrie said, you know, the city's trying to get more space between the sidewalk and the street, and I think for bikeways we should be doing the same thing. There is a bus stop right in front, so I thought that was right in front of the condo, basically, so that's a great possibility there. As Jimmy said, looking at the history of the area and the land use around it, that was the old Highway 169, which is a federal highway, I presume. And so it's the only straight street in the area that connects anything, and it connects Grandview, as you mentioned, it connects Grandview to kind of the Lincoln Drive area. Excuse me. So even though a large portion of the neighborhood is single-family homes, it's the kind of street where you would expect to have more density than you would in, say, some quiet side street. And then looking at, there's a diagram as part of the packet called comp plan. It shows the land use in the area. And again, I think Jimmy mentioned this, is that if you look up and down Vernon, pretty much its entire length, there are pockets of higher density kind of all along it. So I think that fits really well with what you're trying to do here. And obviously there's across the street, across Ollinger, there's duplexes right there, and across Vernon and down a little bit, there's larger buildings. So I think it all fits very well with what you're trying to do. As other commissioners said, I'm not a huge fan of the setback variance on the south side, but you said that you were going to try to get rid of that parking bay and try to reconfigure the villas, and I think that's a good idea. Otherwise, I think it's really, really well designed. I know you're increasing density because of the cost of land, but I think it also makes great sense in terms of addressing climate change. The design, especially of the condo, encourages multimodal transit, and even with the bus stop out there. Even though it's fully parked according to city regulations. We're hearing from a lot of developers of multi-family housing that all the parking isn't necessarily needed, so I hope you have a potential other use for some of that parking if you don't need it over time. As I think Commissioner Berube said, it needs bicycle parking. Somebody mentioned that. It does need bicycle parking and an easy way to get to it. Potentially room for multiple bikes in each residence. I also agree with the need for affordable housing. I think a unit there would add to the city's affordable housing, and the fact that we do distribute it throughout the city rather than having it in just one area. In contrast to other commissioners, I think the Vernon setback is fine. I think it gives it a little bit of urbanism, and I think because the bus stop is there and because there's a sidewalk there, and because it is a connector to Grandview, and it connects Grandview to the 9 Mile Creek Trail to the west, I think something closer to the street really makes a lot of sense there. It also seems that the entrance is on Vernon. Is that true? So even though you go in on Ollinger to park, the front door, so to speak, is on is on Vernon, and I think that makes great sense. I was going to suggest that if it wasn't true. I like the setback of, you were saying 8 to 10 feet on the third level. I think that makes a big difference. I think if it weren't there, it would have a very different feeling, and I think neighbors would I'd agree with neighbors who might be upset with that. But I really like the setback on that third level. It really makes it feel much better. In terms of having having a multi-family building there, you're building new housing on the east side of it, and those people know what's coming. I mean, they know that's there. And then across the street is duplexes. So I think, I don't think everyone who lives next to this building knows or will know before they move in that there's going to be multi-story housing there. So I don't think that, there's no excuse that neighbors don't like it, because nobody next to it is going to be surprised by it. And I like that the parking is underground, and I don't know why the city requires X number of parking spaces outside, but I'm perfectly fine with the fact that there's more parking underground than there is outside. I guess that's about it.
All right. Do you have something more, Jimmy?
A couple things came to mind. One question, Commissioner Lee brought it up. You guys incorporating these 5 new villa homes into that area, is part of all this to separate those condos from that association? Yes. Right, so that would be a separate, it's not, okay, right, okay. Just wanted to be clear about that. Second, about some sort of buffer, Commissioner Nemeroff brought it up, between Vernon, I bike along that a lot with the kids, and I mean, it's speedy, right? And so having the building closer is good, but I think having some sort of buffer makes sense also, because the power lines are on the other side of the street, so those trees won't end up getting lopped off like they just did 3 months ago. So it makes sense to have some more landscaping maybe between this building and the road. If you can get rid of a couple parking spots and just pull it back 10 feet even. Thinking ahead, when I mentioned the potential path that could go through there, that could really work well with phase 2 if the building is near where you have it and that empty space could be a park. That would be an awesome amenity for everyone involved, and maybe that's just something that could be part of the plan that would help for sure any neighbor if there was some sort of park element to this. It'd be a cool place for people to gather that doesn't exist yet. That's it.
All right, thank you. Great. And I'm sorry that you weren't able to talk. It's not a public hearing. Are you with the homeowners association? Okay. It's okay, we can let them, yeah, go for it.
My name is Michael Cashman. I'm a member of the board of directors in the Old Vernon Homeowners Association, and I appreciate all the comments that I've heard, and I appreciate the presentation. I just want to emphasize that the third edition is part of the Old Vernon Homeowners Association, and that anything that happens on that parcel is going to require approval from the Homeowners Association before it gets to the city level. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So does this go to the council on?
This will go to the council next week.
Next week, okay. All right, thank you. That's it. So next on the agenda is correspondence and petitions. Nothing. Moving on. Chair and member comments.
I got a quick question. I was just by the 66th and Xerxes, so the northwest corner, and the building's gone. Was that the tightest building, or is that the one? There were 2 buildings in one, but is that project on the front burner now? I mean, as
It
we
is.
looked at it, maybe
Yeah,
a year or two ago, huh?
Yeah, as you remember, our site plans are good for 2 years from the date we approved them, and they pulled a permit literally a few days before the 2 years expired, so.
As I remember, it was a building, it was housing with that similar kind of curved face,
yeah.
like the one on the old Best Buy site, so it was be kind of
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. 2 phases, this is the first phase, more units in the first phase
Okay.
than the second. But
Yeah, good, all right.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Ian.
This is more of an issue maybe to discuss, but in some ways, both presentations tonight, and both issues tonight, and others we've heard recently, people have come in and said to us, well, it's the cost that's driving this, the need for variance. It's the cost of the land, and I think we need to, we might want to think about how we deal with that issue, both from a city standpoint and from a policy standpoint. I mean, how much does cost of the land become a factor that weighs into the decision whether or not to grant a variance? I'm not suggesting any solution, but I think it's an issue that we should give further consideration to and have just a more of a detailed thought through analysis of it, how we should review those kind of comments.
But the finances are part of every plan, right? And you're always going to have better finances if you can put more into every space. It's always an issue.
it is, I hear it with every project that comes through. We can't base our decisions based on those economic factors. We're just looking at the land use and what's best for the site.
Of course, but when people say, well, my need is driven by economic factors, they're asking us to do things that might not necessarily be done otherwise. You know,
You shouldn't feel pressured to approve things based on their financial situation.
if that, and I'm just saying we have discussion. If that's the start and finish of our conversation, I guess I'm fine with it. But it's something we're hearing more and more frequently. I'm coming before you tonight because my cost is so high to buy this.
Land is expensive.
Okay.
Well, I mean, doesn't the decisions the city makes affect the value of the land? I mean, if we keep giving variances for everything, then, I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I'm just saying if we allowed every single variance, then that makes every piece of property more valuable than it would otherwise be.
Let me
right?
clarify my comment. I'm not asking tonight to discuss the issue of how to resolve it. I'm just asking, is this an issue that we think we should look into how to approach it more? I mean, if everyone's good and it's not something I'm not asking for the reasons why. I understand it. I'm just, if everyone's good about how that's presented, and I'm fine. We don't have to look into it further. It just seems like it's something we hear a lot, and maybe we want to just have a more crisp analysis of it. But if everyone else is good, then we can just move on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think about some of this stuff, and I think it's a good reminder where there has been cases where people say, this is what I must do because of economics. And I think sometimes we surrender to that a little bit. And there certainly has been things that have gone through because there's been an ultimatum presented to us. And at least it's a good reminder to not let that push us, because it's always a part of every scenario. And there's times where, at least when it gets past us to the council, that becomes more of the story. And thank you for bringing it up, because it's kind of a good reminder every meeting, honestly.
Any other comments?
I just wanted to mention that Greta Thunberg arrived by sailboat to the U.S. She's the young protester from Sweden, I think.
And it's another mode of transportation.
Yes, and it's completely carbon-free. She says what she believes. She does what she believes.
She was, she's amazing. Asperger's, right? And, and just, what was she saying, that she only speaks when she has something to say? And this is, it's like, hallelujah.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, she's pretty cool. Any staff comments? Anything been happening? Anything coming down the pipe, however you say that?
No.
No.
Applications kind of quiet. We had nothing on the council agenda last meeting.
Wow.
And may I ask a question?
Sure.
Just to remind everybody, where are we in the comprehensive plan? It's been sent to the neighboring municipalities, and has it also been sent to the school?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Public hearings come in November-ish. So we're summer's almost over. It'll be here before we know it.
We are meeting with the board, school board too, presenting to the school board.
Yes, a working group of the school board.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Not to put you on the spot, but does Sue have a report on the TDM meeting that I missed?
You're putting me on the spot. Okay, so what we did was actually give ourselves a little more time. We found we were in really a great discussion on some of the options that we would really like to propose. So the idea is to come up with a few actual tools the city can implement as part of the new development process. And these kind of work like, some of them work like incentives, others just work like requirements. And obviously the whole thing of TDM is to minimize car usage. So how can we decrease use of cars? Traffic demand management. So we got into kind of a nitty-gritty kind of thing. Is that really going to be helpful? How many people could use that? Would businesses go for that sort of thing? So we are extending our timeline a little bit, but I think that we are also ending on sort of a November-ish kind of deadline to come up with some concrete list of things. And then I think it is actually a transportation, I'm trying to think, yeah, transportation commission work group. So I think they will take it under their wing and then move it forward from there. Yep.
So traffic demand management sounds better than I thought you were saying tedium. Which is, why are we caring about that?
TDM of use.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, God. I just wanted to comment on staff's awesome report just earlier. I feel like we've been up against times where they have to stand by what it says and we have to interpret the other way. And it was nice to see them kind of interpret the same way we were going. Maybe it just ended up being that way, but it was nice to see that there was obviously a lot of pushback, and I think a lot of things come to us after staff does a lot of work whittling things to match how the city has prescribed things to preserve Edina in a good way, and I thought that was cool to see. Usually we don't see behind the scenes as much, so just appreciate the hard work you guys do.
Awesome. Is there a motion to close the meeting?
Motion to close the meeting?
I'll second that.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.